Good afternoon to all that have joined today. I just want to check with our guest, Dr. Mphahlwa, if all is set on your side.
This meeting is being recorded.
You're muted, Solo.
Yeah. Okay, good evening. I had a bit of a challenge to connect properly, but it has eventually worked out. So yeah, good evening, everyone. I see very few people here, so it looks like that would be the people that are on this link, and the others are on another platform.
Correct. This session is now being live streamed on Facebook PIA page.
Okay.
So we have few delegates that have joined in the Zoom, but we have people that will join from the Facebook page. So I think Monin will update us because she's monitoring both platforms.
Yeah. Okay. So would I have been the people there are people who are interested. I send them the same link. So will they be able to use the same link as well? The Zoom link.
Monin
yes,
controls
they can.
that, so
yes,
I'll let you get
absolutely.
it. Okay.
They can.
All right.
Okay. I think I'll just send them again because they were just saying that they are having difficulty. I'm just telling them to join the Zoom because I thought maybe it's limited only to certain people. Okay. So on my side, I'm ready to share. Let me do that.
I think if you can do the sharing, while you're doing that, I will do the introduction, then we will get going.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I can see it on my side.
Okay, is it on presentation screen now?
It is.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Monin.
Hello, Luyanda. Long time no see.
Yeah, since my term ended, everybody has forgotten me, including you.
No, you don't come visit me, and you're too far.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm happy to be here. Thanks for hosting me at PIA again, Pia.
Great. Okay, I will do the introduction quickly. First of all, again, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Luyanda Mphahlwa, and I also want to welcome a PIA represented by Monin, my colleagues from TUT, myself, Emmanuel Ngambule, Victor Mokaba, I see is joined, and Oratile that represent TUT ADA, which is Archives for Design and Architecture, who are running this series. We call it In Plain Sight Lecture Series. This is the last series of the year. We've had a number of them running through this year, starting from 2021, where I think Dr. Luyanda Mphahlwa was moderating our first series with Mamlinda Mvusi in 2021. So I would like to thank all that have followed us, both through PIA Zoom link and also through our Facebook, the PIA Facebook page. If you may allow me, I would like to introduce our speaker so that we can get the ball rolling in the time we have available. So Dr. Luyanda Mphahlwa is a Cape Town-based architect and urban designer, a practitioner and a commentator on various design and socially relevant matters regarding the urban condition of African cities. He obtained his master's degree in architecture at Technical University of Berlin. He is currently the director of Luyanda Mphahlwa DesignSpaceAfrica, an architecture and design firm he founded in 2009. Until then, he was a partner at MMA Architects. Patty presented earlier in the year as well, so your former partner has done this, has gone through this series as well. And he was there for 12 years. His education in South Africa was interrupted when he was incarcerated on Robben Island Prison in 1981. I wasn't born then, Dr. Mphahlwa. It was just 2 years before I was born. And that was for his role in the anti-apartheid struggle. After his release in 1986, he left for Germany, where he spent 15 years in exile there. He has received various design awards, including SAIA Corobrik Award of Excellence in 2006 for the South African Embassy building in Berlin, Germany. He was also the recipient of the USA-based Keystone Design Prize in 2008 for the design Indaba Sandbag low-cost housing in Mitchells Plein, Cape Town, done in 2010. Luyanda was also awarded an Honorary Doctorate in Science and Technology from the Walter Sisulu University, and that happened in 2010 for his contribution in innovative design and technology. He's currently an Adjunct Professor at University of Cape Town under African Center for Cities, and that is for the next 5 years. He serves in various boards and councils, including the Robben Island Museum Council, which he did serve there until 2019, and currently at the South African Heritage Resources Agency. He also served at the South African Institute of Architects, SAIA, as a president there from 2018 to 2021. He's a member of SACAP also, African Institute, Council for the Profession, and he's also a member of UDISA, the Urban Design Institute of South Africa. Without wasting much time, I would like to welcome Dr. Luyanda Mphahlwa. The stage is yours, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, sometimes we forget what we're all doing, and I think presentations like these are a moment just to reflect. So when I was collecting all the information, I thought it is worth having these sessions like in plain sight, where we reflect back on the work we've done, we reflect back on the things that have inspired us. So my talk today really is going to be about architecture and buildings, but it's more a story, because I think these series have to play a dual role. I think as architects, as people, it's sometimes important to just think of what inspires you, where do you come from, what are the things that have shaped your thinking, and what matters to you. And of course, there's the architecture part. So don't expect a high-blown kind of architecture presentation type talk. Yes, there will be architecture. And I chose the topic on purpose because I do want to speak about the social dimension of architecture, which I think is something that I wouldn't say is missing, but I find very little of it in the teaching of architecture, and it's something that I've been concerned about for quite a while. It's not the only thing we do, but it has become an area of interest to me, and I think it is important to share it. So I live in the beautiful city of Cape Town, as has been said, a city that is always marveled by many in terms of its setting, its beauty, as they say, and its combination of mountain and sea. And I've been working here since 20 years, as has been mentioned. Now, all this started in Umtata, in the beautiful city of Umtata, where I was born some years back, well, more than 60 years back. Born from, parents that were in themselves professionals, albeit in the typical South African setting. My father was a teacher at the school I eventually ended up going to, St. John's College, and my mother was a nurse. This is when they met, and that's me and my second brother who, you know, we became 4 siblings in the end. So the picture on the right of me is me and my other siblings and also relatives as well. So it's quite actually interesting to see the role that your parents play in your upbringing. And then when I see these pictures and think of the house we're living in at the time and where South Africa is today, it's quite a leap. So it's those moments where you sometimes have to think back. And I think this session is going to help us do that. So I went to a school, obviously Umtata is in the Transkei. And I went to a school called St. John's College. And these are my brothers. We called ourselves the Unholy Eight at boarding school. And we are a group that has actually stayed together, interestingly. And so it's quite interesting to meet the Unholy Eight guys, even if it's not all of them. We met here in my 50th birthday, some 12 years ago. So it's just one of those things. Sometimes, you know, when we grew up, we were at boarding school, we didn't know where we were going to end up. We didn't know what is going to happen to us. So my friends and colleagues and like real, you know, childhood buddies have kind of remained with me as friends for all those years. He became a deputy governor at the Reserve Bank. Unfortunately, we lost him to COVID. My age, very painful. He's an engineer based in Joburg. He also actually was the first to go to exile in our group. We were in Matric when he left and ended up in London, but he went through the whole kind of exile trip via Botswana and everywhere, but ended up in London, and he's an engineer now in Joburg. Vic studied architecture with me. In fact, he is the person who influenced me to come to Germany. He was already there, but he didn't. He just facilitated my travel. So, but I'll come to that story later. He is a businessman, Zogisi, in East London. And my other very, very good buddy, we also lost him to COVID, unfortunately, was an entrepreneur, but he studied journalism at Rhodes. So these are people that have kind of been in the journey with me, nothing to do with architecture, but we're just friends. So growing up, Tata is in a homeland, former homeland of the Transkei, which is this yellow bit here. And I think, again, we have to remember where South Africa comes from, that, you know, all the 13% of the land that had been allocated to Black people is in these colored spots here. These were all the homelands. Transkei was here, Ciskei was there, KwaZulu-Natal over here, Bophuthatswana, Venda, and Qwaqwa, all these places that were supposed to be those reserved for occupation by Black people were all in the outskirts of what South Africa actually is about. And this whole white part is also white because it was allocated for white people. So when we look at the issues of spatial injustice that I'm going to talk about a bit later, it's really about the real big challenge of how people were actually displaced to be in these areas where there were no facilities, probably still no facilities up to now. And in architecture, we are dealing with this challenge of how do we integrate our country? How do we integrate our cities? So for me, I always go back to the social engineering that we've inherited, that basically designated places of living and, people being forced to live in certain areas. We're still dealing with that up to today. Even though I would say there are opportunities for everyone to be where they want to be, but if you look at the demography of South Africa, predominantly these structures have remained, whether it be in the cities, where there's a CBD, or be it in the urban-rural kind of dichotomy. We're dealing with this challenge. So at the time I grew up, obviously Madiba was in prison, and we knew that being involved in politics, we were always told you're going to end up like him in prison. Well, that was kind of prophecy in a way. And I like to give a flashback in terms of the time I grew up. I grew up in the divided South Africa, in the apartheid South Africa. And I mean, the dominant picture in the urban areas was running away from police. And this picture is relevant, or these pictures are relevant because I did my matric in 1976. This was the year of the Soweto uprisings. So in a sense, I am the 1976 generation, even though I was in the Transkei. So all these things have played a role in kind of shaping the future that became of me. I won't dwell much on this. So from St. John's, I went on to study in Durban, started at the University of Natal in 1978, architecture, at a time when we needed to have permission from the Minister of Education. So after 76, I had to wait for a year to get the permit. And in that year, with the help of my parents, my dad believed that we should study engineering as his sons, and my mother thought I liked to draw houses. So she got me myself an apprenticeship in the only white firm in Umtata at the time, Osman Lang Architects. So I worked there for a year, and then I went to University of Natal. I'm not going to go into the story of that. I failed my first year. I say this all the time because I do think that, firstly, I don't think I was prepared enough to be in architecture. But on the other hand, the lecturers that we had at the time felt that it is not their duty to bring out architecture in us. In fact, they were of the firm belief that as Black students that were allowed in, we didn't have the ability to think in 3 dimensions, and therefore we were not to be helped. Their opinion and their viewpoint was that you're either born with design or you're not. So in a sense, there were not even support systems in the university to kind of really establish whether this person can be an architect or not. You really had to find your way. So this was at my res in Durban. I was staying at what was called University of Natal Black Section. This was where the medical students of University of Natal were staying. So this t-shirt I'm wearing there was the Technicon t-shirt, because after failing, I actually changed to Technicon. So this group that you see at the bottom here, that's my group the year of 1980. Because if you just calculate 77, I was working an apprenticeship. 78, I started my first year, failed, had to go back to Mthatha. 79, wait for another permit to study at the Technicon, which was a white-only university or college. And this was my year, 1980. And interestingly, after my arrest in 1981, they kept in touch with me. So this is a postcard they actually wrote to me. You can see it's January 1986. They were telling me what they're all doing, and a very strange situation, because I was arrested for my anti-apartheid activity, which was really an issue of the racial divide between Black and white. But on the other hand, I had white friends. I developed white friends, by the way, who I only developed at university. I never had any childhood white friends or anything. So again, a very kind of crazy South African dichotomy where, you know, the system is spitting you out, sending you to jail, but on the other hand, one has developed some other kind of relationships. But this is the nature of South Africa. So I went on to, you know, these are pictures that are jumping back and forth. So I do want to make the point that after my release and going to Germany and qualifying, when I returned to South Africa in 2000, I insisted on getting my diploma from Technikon. And I'm very proud of this. And I have to mention this because somehow in South Africa, we've come to this kind of schism of whether university or Technikon, but the Technikons have been done away with, and now Technikons, or those universities that had that technical focus, are now called Universities of Technology, which TUT I think is one of them. Now, I'm a very strong believer that we need the two systems. And personally, I find it a bit of a challenge or unfortunate that we are kind of starting to believe that architecture is a kind of a one-sided, streamlined kind of career. And we're maybe downplaying the role of the technical education in architecture. And the fact that, you know, it looks like to me we're trying to make everything a university that does the same thing. I hope not. You know, TUT, Professor Mpahlwa, that, you know, you still have that focus of ensuring that you produce students that will develop strong technical abilities, even though you do want to get them to understand design better. But I do think that we should not lose kind of the technical side of architecture, because without it, we can't do good buildings. I have to say this. But anyway, this was for me very important that I actually go get my diploma. And I connected with my group of 1980. Some of them came, but this was not the occasion. The occasion here was one of them became the president of KZN, Kevin Bingham, was a friend of mine. We were at the same class together. But what is important about this picture is the fact that the person that I regard as having nurtured me and actually made me believe I could be an architect is this man here, Mr. Napier. He was our studio master at Technikon. And he's the man, when I came from university, actually feeling like I can't be anything, but I had the benefit of having worked for 2 years in an architecture firm, of having kind of snoopered into university. So he picked up that I do have some ability, which he just encouraged. So if anyone were to ask me who played a role in being an architect, firstly, it's my mother, because she identified something that I did not even take seriously. But when then I was given the opportunity, Mr. Napier would be the second one who actually was able to get out of me that passion and that love for architecture. So I will always be indebted to him and his foresight to actually galvanize even the class, because you must remember that I only met these guys in class and not socially, because I couldn't socialize with them. But in the class, he actually made the students to come look at my drawings, especially the technical drawings, because I had become good in that. And it was quite empowering for a white lecturer at that time to tell white students to come look at my work just by words, without necessarily, you know, praising me or anything, but just to say that go look at Luyanda's drawings. And in that way, we actually become quite a neat group. I'm going to try and speed up because I know I can talk very long on these issues. So I went on to Robben Island, which also was obviously another perspective. In fact, it changed my entire perspective about life, about the struggle, about what South Africa is about, and what the conflict was about, and had the great opportunity to meet with the old man on a personal basis, not necessarily on the island, because when I came here, he had already been transferred to Victor Verster, but I had other opportunities to meet him. And I feel this is another defining moment in my whole horizon and in my own growing up that has left quite an impression and incredible influence in the way I think. So again, you know, another defining moment. Robben Island was a place where I came at 22, 1982. Actually, it just occurred to me that I'm 40 years there. When I arrived on Robben Island, it's exactly 40 years ago. It was in September 1982. And that obviously changed my perspective. I won't go deep into it. It will come out maybe in the talking, but this picture in the middle is quite important because when I got to Germany, I pursued architecture. And for my thesis, I chose actually the transformation of Robben Island from a political prison to an international center for peace. So I had to come back in 1996 to actually do my research there and to actually get some understanding of the island, not from a cell perspective as an inmate, but from a spatial perspective. So I got there and I met one of the prison warders who actually recognized me. And I found him still there 10 years after I had been released. Again, something which for me tells you that, you know, the world sometimes works in very different ways. I mean, I had had the opportunity to develop myself, was just about to get my master's. And obviously he was still there. Robben Island was no longer a political prison, but was a common law prison. So he was still working there. And these are some of the things that sometimes we forget in South Africa. We think these things about the reconciliation and the fact that we had to find a meaningful and a worthwhile political settlement were not just about the talks and the speeches by our senior leaders, but they were actually happening on the ground as well. So we must never forget the complexity of the country and the complexity of our situation. And at the moment, we're questioning quite a lot of the things that happened at the time, but I don't think we're taking enough time to understand the nature of the conflict as it was at the time and how dangerous it was actually. So I went on to study in Berlin, and this is my first apartment in a place called Wedding. I became part of the anti-apartheid struggle internationally, obviously associated with the ANC. And it was the time when the East and West was separated by the Berlin Wall. My late daughter, who was 8 at the time, 10, 12, somewhere there, came to visit. And, you know, I took her around and we were at the Berlin Wall here. And then one of the things that is interesting, obviously, is that unification also happened during the time I was finishing my studies. So these were pictures I was taking during the building of the Potsdamer Platz or Potsdamer Square, which was this, urban development, which was to link East and West Berlin. It was built on no man's land. And I mean, it's now a well-developed area that connects East and West Berlin. So I finished my studies during that time. And I had the opportunity, together with Mpahlwa, to design the South African Embassy in Berlin, fresh from university. And one of the things we did was to actually try and introduce into architecture how African influences in design and in craftsmanship could be brought into architecture. We discovered that there are generations of women who are taking old techniques like Lidema, basically the carving of plaster and making decorations from it, who are actually still practicing this. And we actually got, we worked with a curator, and we got, these ladies were working with a lady from Pretoria called Tina Kamaya. So we actually got them to come to Berlin to actually execute this craft on the building. And we use themes like forged metal as part of the design. We use things like, the carving of plaster, obviously, but we tried to find things that would, in a way, influence the design of the building, including the fact that some of the designs that were done with the carving of plaster were actually done with oxides. So these are actually oxides that used to be mixed into adobe or to mud, and now they are mixing it actually in actual cement. So this is not paint, but these are oxides which they brought with them from South Africa and did these designs freehand, just with a string and a nail. And they were able to create these incredible kind of designs in the interior of the building. And we did some way of making the building feel African in a way, used African materials, boom sprayed sandstone, Zimbabwe granite, partly honed, partly polished. And instead of using rock art on stone, which would be the normal way, but I mean, how do you do that? So we decided to sandblast it on glass so that it actually gives that sense of arrival when you enter the embassy. So these are all the things that, I mean, I was a young student, fresh from university. Mphahlwa had been working a few years, and we came together as 4 partners to be, the design architects for this building. The building, which is on Tiergartenstrasse, we decided very boldly to open it to the streets, to say that South Africa is a modern country that is opening itself, transparent, opening itself to the world community of nations. And you can see that along all the buildings that are in the embassy district, we're the only ones that is actually open to the street with a gesture of transparency. And we combine stone with metal elements, using that metaphor of a forged metal as part of what African people have been doing for years, using copper, brass, and so on. So the ancient civilizations have been using these materials. So we thought we should pay homage to that. So one of the questions I always ask is the question of actually who owns the city, going back to the whole idea of the spatial injustice and how we need to have a discussion around socially inclusive spatial planning. Very, very quickly, our cities are built on the CBD model. Cape Town, with 4.5 million people, has only about 80,000 people living in the CBD. CBDs were never meant for people to live there. So you ask yourself, of the 4.5 million, where are the rest? They are out in the Cape Flats, in the townships, in the areas that are far away from that inner city. So we find ourselves as architects having to deal with this challenge of how to improve the areas which are far from the city, but at the same time, we want integrated cities. It's a big challenge, which I think as a country, we actually have not done much about to try and resolve in a kind of a systemic way. And I think it's a challenge that we're going to remain with for quite some time. Sorry, I have to drink some water. So some of the work we do obviously is in the township areas, and we know the challenge of people having to travel, spend 40% of their income on public transport when it is there, and they live 40 kilometers away from the city. It's an ongoing problem that we're not going to solve. And we know that when there's no public transport, the cities are paralyzed. People who come in the city every day can't come into the city to work. So it's an ongoing challenge. We know about the congested areas, informal living conditions that we're dealing with. We know the lack of services and the fact that, in some of these areas, there's no water, let alone electricity, and sanitation is a problem. So in that situation, an architect becomes an agent for change, and this is what we have found ourselves working with. So this is one of the projects that we did, which is well known, well documented, and I think this is why I'm even invited to speak in these places, because the 10 by 10 Sandbag house kind of, made us known all over the world. I won't go into detail with it. We're asked to design 10 low-cost housing buildings in the Freedom Park Township. And we opted to use Sandbags for this. And this was also just saying that when you are given a problem, you actually have to make it a bigger problem. We made the embassy design a bigger problem. We were never asked to bring in African elements and all these things, but we felt as architects, we have the obligation to define how a South African embassy is going to be presented to the world. That was never part of the brief, but we made it part of the brief. So even here, we said, we're not going to solve low-cost housing by continuing to do the same old thing. We need to look at different ways of doing things, and Sandbags we found as quite an interesting opportunity to test new building systems or different building systems, but deriving it from the old tradition of thermally performing buildings, whereby the wall is not a generator of heat, but actually is the one that separates the interior spaces from the exterior by managing heat transfer between outside and inside. So Sandbags are performing the same role that an Adobe thermal wall actually performs. And interestingly, for me, whilst in Durban, when I was studying, we were, drawing in East of Architecture, the Cologne Dome, and all the Doric orders and everything that is there. In Germany, in Berlin, my professors wanted to know, how do people build in South Africa? Why are the buildings the way they are? And this is when I started actually getting interested in how indigenous architecture and building systems have actually shaped how these environments, how we respond to temperature and climate and all these kinds of things, how we use available materials. So this was a tribute to that process of saying Sandbags are providing us with a new opportunity to test different ways of building. So we worked with a supplier of this, combining it with this timber frame structure, which was prefabricated, brought to site, working with communities, and actually doing the normal building stuff that you do in any building. You've got to protect the building from moisture. You've got to make sure that your floors are well compacted and all these things. So we did all this, but the most important thing was the fact that we were able to involve the community in the building. And this is one of the things that seems to have been forgotten in our country as we deliver even for the urban poor. We deliver houses for them and we wait for the people to actually, until we're finished, and then we hand over the keys, but we don't actually engage on a participation basis with the people. So just some pictures of the outcomes of this. Some of the buildings were standalone, some were kind of semi-detached, so that you create a kind of a variation of built fabric. And the story about the little windows that are spread all over is derived also from the Rondavo, which never has big windows, but has got small windows because it's to reduce the extent of sun that actually penetrates on a large piece of glass. So the principles of heat gain, the physics of buildings, is that your biggest heat generator is the glazing. So by limiting it and spreading it out, you are actually deflecting, that heat gain from one spot, but at the same time allow adequate light, as you can see in these buildings, that penetrates inside. So these were completed in 2008, 2009. And this is the award we got from the US for the design Indaba, for the Currystone Design Award. So this is just, again, showing the different kind of experiences, and we've had people who read about this in all the magazines in the world and come to Cape Town and they want to go and see these places. And one of the things that becomes a pleasure for an architect is when you make a suggestion and the owners or the users take it on. We created these balconies as possible third bedrooms because these were built on the government subsidy system of 2 bedrooms, basically 40 square meters. So we said, okay, we'll create a balcony, which would also be just a space for kids to play. I think there is a picture behind somewhere where you can see that the children are using the balcony as a space, a safe space within their home. So, but we actually found out that people are actually starting to occupy these balconies and create shelter, and it would in no time be enclosed and it would be a third bedroom. And these are the things that we derived also from the incremental readings and writings of Charles Correa, who, in my view, is the forefather of incremental housing for the urban poor. And we use that maybe not in a systematic way like he did, but those writings and that thinking, filtered into our own approach here. So we've been working in the informal settlement of Kosovo, which is in the Philippi Township, and we are part of a Department of Human Settlements appointment, and we obviously had to go and walk the site right in the informal settlements with my office, meet the community to understand who we're building for, and we've been working on this since 2016. It's a site with about 15,000 people living there next to the Philippi station. Stadium was built during the 2010 as a legacy stadium, but it's now used by SAPS. It's around an existing kind of older kind of township, settlement pattern. This is how the informal settlement looks, and it started because a station was built there in Philippi. And I mean, we always start obviously with the drawing, like to understand what the site is about. So we had very enthusiastic students in that year. So James, the blonde guy in the picture, it was his job to actually map all those shacks. And you can see this is a figure ground map. We wanted to understand the movement patterns. This is the main road through Kosovo. The station is over here. This part belongs to Prasa. And we just had to understand, and in our interpretation of the new urban form that we're creating, we're trying to make sure that we don't disrupt too much those patterns that are already existing. And therefore, we tried as much as possible to work with the figure ground and to develop our own response from an urban point of view to what was already there. And obviously, I always have enthusiastic students building models and understanding the urban fabric and the urban context, because we were preparing to work with the community. So I took the community of Kosovo that we're working with. There's always a steering committee that is elected by the community, brought them to my office, showed them models. We did models to actually engage with the people on what we're doing, and so that they can also start understanding and appreciating how urban settlements actually are developed. So we would then get feedback from them, redo the models, and go back to them to actually share with them the work that we've been doing so that they are part of the process. I'm very much against this thing that as architects, we think that we know it all and therefore our clients must take what, especially communities, must take cue from us. We know what's good for them. I don't believe if you approach architecture from the social dimension, that is the right thing to do. So we work with these communities, and interestingly, these communities were also at war with each other because the land that was going to be built first was in the Kala Township, and the people from Kosovo are African people coming from the Eastern Cape largely, and we had to manage to bring these two together so that they will be part of one community. So it also meant then spending evenings in the township, sharing the work with the people, addressing them and making sure that there's buy-in from them. And these are nights that you spend, it's not part of the fee, it's not even considered to be something extra. You just have to do it. And I mean, it was essentially our contribution to make sure that the community we're building for is actually part of the process. And we did, you know, sketch up 3D models about the different types of typologies. We made sure that we don't have just one single typology. Some are row houses, as you can see here. Some are semi-detached. Some we actually showed the community how they can extend by actually leaving sufficient space on the side that they can park their car, but they can also build above the carport additional, you know, living space. So these are the things we're sharing with them, so that they also understand how they can actually, you know, develop their properties further. And obviously, we did, you know, 3D renders of the precincts, and construction started at the beginning of 2020. And then I moved to another project of ours that we did in the Eastern Cape, which was building rural schools as part of the ASIDI program. This was a program where we appointed for 50 schools. I put up a big team of professionals. We were 4 firms of architects. We were the lead designers. We had 2 engineers, we had QSs, the whole lot, and we had to coordinate the design. And for this project, the only way we could deliver it, because it was meant to be completed in a very short space of time, we developed the kit of parts approach, where we dissected a school in terms of what are the different components that make a school, designed the kits, and then we applied the kits according to the site as we found them. And this was in the hills and valleys of Port St. John's. This is the Umzimvubu River. And we, you know, we get here and you find this is the teacher of these kids. And I mean, I come from this environment, I know what's going on here. And even there, you have to engage with these communities so that you also can benefit, or they can benefit from the work you're doing. One of the key problems with this project was even accessibility, you know, just to access the rural areas, you know, can see the roads. So some suppliers of building materials would just dump it somewhere, and the builder would have to find his own way to collect the stuff. So one of the things, you know, from the rural hinterland of the Transkei that has really shaped my thinking is travel. So I've been fortunate to be able to travel the world and to different places. This picture here, I was with the head of the Frank Lloyd Wright School in Taliesin, Wisconsin, in the US. This was 2011, and I was invited to give a talk there. Very, very exciting space. This is a kind of studio that Frank Lloyd Wright had actually designed and was working from. This school only has 26 students, and in that same period, I was in Taliesin. I was staying in one of Frank Lloyd Wright's developments that he had done in Taliesin, and was actually living with some of the people that worked with him. We stayed in a cottage with a landscaper of Frank Lloyd Wright. She was in her 90s. And I mean, to be just part of that history and sharing a space with these people gives you a completely different perspective. So in that same trip, I'd been to LA to visit the good old Frank, whom I had met in Cape Town. We had a breakfast with him. I brought my whole office in 2010. And in 2011, he invited me to come to LA, and this is the trip that we took. So, I mean, it's just one of those things that, you know, influence you and shape your own thinking and broaden your own horizon about architecture and what it means to you. And in fact, the issue of model making, I must mention, Frank Gary invited us. I went with Uli, my wife, who's an architect also, invited us to his studio. And his studio is full of models. And the architects who work with him were telling us that he does 70, 80 models per building. And they have to do all these models, and he'll then twist it around and turn it around until it gets to a point where he says, okay, this is now the one we're going with. So very interesting to understand how he works. We spent a week in LA, and he invited us, or got us invited to, he got me invited to speak at the architecture school in LA. Very, very interesting. Also at the SAIA, which is a very kind of artistic oriented design school. Very, very interesting. And then just coming back, we've started being involved in a bit of more of affordable housing. And these pictures just show that, you know, it's always starts with a sketch and with that model and with just some photoshopping just to get a sense of what you're doing. This was an infill development in Deep River here in Cape Town. And I'll just flash through this. We did SketchUp models, how this fits into the context, created courtyards, paying homage to the larger courtyards that were there, but we kind of worked on a more compact kind of way. And again, doing SketchUp models, we had this idea that, you know, the balconies should not be the typical way that you just have balconies on top of each other. Give privacy to each resident so that they can feel their own kind of space. Obviously, we have very little budgets to work with, so color plays a very important role for us. These are low budget projects of affordable housing. And this has been built. It was completed just before COVID. People are living there, and it's one of the projects that we just so proud of. And not to mention that we did the Soweto Football Center during 2010. I'm just flying through just projects that, oh, I think this was not supposed to be there. And then coming towards the end, I mean, one of the interesting projects that we did of last was the Radisson Red project at the waterfront, which is situated in close proximity to MOCA, MOCA, the museum that has been built, and which is like the centerpiece and well documented as well. So we were invited to design the Radisson Red Hotel in association with Peruvian Architects. I was the lead design architect there. A building that is right in the kind of harbor and ship repair area of the waterfront, quite loud. So we had to work with acoustic engineers to make sure that the building is sealed from all this noise. But we tried in our response that the building actually has some dialogue with the silo building that was being built at the same time. And we think that even the use of materials that we chose actually spoke to how this former semi-industrial area was now being redeveloped into an urban hub within the waterfront. And we're very proud of what we did here. And you look at the side before, looking at the backdrop of Cape Town. And this was one of the first opportunities where the waterfront was actually creating an urban link or city link back from the city into the waterfront. Via the clock tower and across the bridge to the rest of the commercial side of the waterfront. And I mean, we always had these dreams of, you know, using cotton steel because it's shipbuilding and we wanted this kind of weathered feel. But you know, architects always dream, but you don't always win. So this is just a few pictures of the construction of it. And how, I mean, I love the site. I like to be in the site and to be with the building people to make sure that the building actually becomes what I would like it to be. So again, even working with a kind of highly commercial project, we insisted on a particular finish that we wanted. We wanted a weathered brick finish. We didn't want a kind of a face brick kind of look with all the pointed kind of joints and everything. So we wanted a random finish, which would also have that kind of natural weathering that is associated for us with a semi-industrial area. So we worked with the builder, got the builder to understand random brick, and we found a very interesting paint product from Germany called Keim, sorry. And this was also going to give it this weathered look, and it's got a guarantee of 15 years that it's going to remain like this. So we're watching it, and so far we're very happy with what we're seeing. So I spend a lot of time on site because as an architect, I don't believe you should leave the building to the builder or to the project manager or to whomsoever to finish it for you. I believe I want to be there. I want to see the end product. I want to make sure that it represents what I believe is what I wanted to create. And here it was spending a lot of time with the builder, looking at samples and making sure that the render that is being made is not applied evenly, because we wanted it to be random. We wanted to have a different kind of feel. And this is the time, unfortunately, that you have to spend on site. We did our renders before, and this is, I mean, from the render to actually what was actually built. We wanted these pop-out windows so that you can actually have a three-dimensional feel to the facade and actually enjoy the brick. And the brick becomes a rustic kind of material combined with this kind of highly engineered metal. And then this was part of the language and the dialogue with the Silo Hotel. And yeah, and the rooms obviously had to have kind of a response to Cape Town, because if you're in a hotel in Cape Town, you don't want to be sitting in a dingy hole. You want to be able to view the city. And we worked with a Scottish interior designer who was a brand architect of Radisson Red. And we had to kind of translate their wishes also in the architecture so that the architecture can reflect what they want. It had to have this industrial look. So we've got large industrial windows that tilt, that are kind of pulled up so that you can actually open the space to the outside. And obviously, I mean, we're in Cape Town, the views in Cape Town, 360 degrees. We were fortunate to be able to create a roof kind of top, bar area and pool for the hotel guests, but it is public as well. And actually, you actually almost like in a sitting room within the Greenpoint area. And this is just what has made joy for us. And the building is alive. It's used a lot, and you can see the relationship with the silo, with Zayat-Moka, sorry. Obviously, you know, you work with your staff, you work with creative people, so it's always important and very necessary for me that, you know, we enjoy that process together, because even if you are the lead design architect, you actually are fooling yourself to think that you are the sole kind of, you know, source of all the knowledge and all the creativity. So your staff plays a very big role, and always grateful of the contribution that our staff make. And yeah, it was launched in 2017, and this is a finished building. And that is that whole kind of three-dimensional play, shadow play that we're able to achieve with the pop-out windows. There is a copy of this hotel in Joburg. They've made a mess of it, whoever the architects are. This is the real red. If you want to know about Radisson Red, come and look at Cape Town. We're very proud of what we're able to achieve here. And the other drive was obviously the theme of Radisson Red is to bring music, art, and architecture together. So it's a very vibrant hotel, and we worked with a local artist, and we also felt that the art should actually be in the facade as well, not just in the interior. The whole thing must work together, and that is what has ended up being the product. And again, you know, next to other developments, the communication with, or the dialogue with Silo was for us quite important. And we're reaching our time. And yeah, this is the Radisson Red, which I would say is our latest project. But the last project which I have to end up with, these are just some of the you know, images of how the random brick was really a theme that we wanted to see actually executed. So those pictures of managing the rendering of the brick and how it was applied, sometimes thick, sometimes thin, was really to try and create this kind of textured brick finish that had a kind of a layer of a modern kind of natural product of paint that gives it a kind of a fresh image, in our opinion, at least. So I have to finish with this project because I'm totally out of time. I did mention that for the Kosovo community, we have been building the first 400 units, those models that you saw. So this project is reaching completion, the first 400. And again, I mean, we tried to approach subsidy housing, government housing, RDP housing, as it is called, in a very different way, where we tried to create place as well. Placemaking was a very big thing for us, kind of developing different typologies so that you don't create just a one-size-fits-all. So you'll see that in all what we're trying to do, we try to define smaller spaces that are identifiable everywhere in this. So there's a kind of a system whereby we try to create spaces and courtyards so that people can have some kind of human scale in this massive development, and not just have streets running through and it's just one giant kind of traffic zone. So we've got streets obviously in between, but we also have kind of pedestrianized areas. Now, again, I mean, these are low budget projects, so we had to work a lot with a bit of color just to kind of give it a sense of difference and variety. And so far, I mean, we are getting very good feedback from the community that is going to live here because they've been part of the process. They've got their community liaison officers who are part of the building process, so they always give feedback. Even the choice of colors, we had to go present it to the people. And obviously there were big debates there, and as architect, you still had to put the final decision on the table, but understand that you've got the buy-in of the people who are going to live there. So this has been a collaborative kind of process. And as we finish, I just want to finish with the last, I think I should stop the share and then share something else very quickly. I hope I find it. Yeah. So we were fortunate to have drone pictures taken of this area, and you can see the kind of urban footprint and the layout and the different spaces that we're trying to create. This is the R300, this route here that connects back to Cape Town. We were finished with phase 1 to 3, and construction is still happening on this end of the site. As you can see, everything is double story. And we always try to create different experiences and different urban forms in terms of how place can be defined. So we are very proud of the work we do. And I believe that the social dimension of architecture is something that is getting very little attention. And I would hope that even if this sensitizes one student or one lecturer, this is my contribution to In Plain Sight. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Mphahlwa. I have learned a lot from this presentation, from hearing your story, from where you came from, Mthatha, and your experiences in Durban, your experiences in the Robben Island, and also in German. I think I'm quite excited also just to be in this presentation and kind of get where you are and what you've been busy with recently. I think you're doing amazing work, and we're really learning from you. So we really appreciate this presentation. what I've picked up from your work, we just use the few minutes left, and hopefully we can take some few questions from those in the Zoom link and also on the WhatsApp group. So I think Oratile will guide us with the questions. But I've got this question that I jotted down while you were talking, because I was trying to trace you in your work, and also to trace your influences. I kind of see a lot of activism in your work, and maybe it comes from your early years experience during the apartheid era. And I've got a question for you. In the Sandbag house, in the subsidized housing that you're doing now in the Radisson Hotel building, I'm wondering, do you see those traces of yourself coming through over the years? Because I'm kind of looking from the outside now and looking at this, I'm like, I see there is a level of activism, there is a level of also linking up to your past. I enjoyed the way that you approach materiality, both in from that embassy in Germany, and how you guys approach the interpreting the use of materials in an African context, but in using it in a German context. So I'm wondering if you do see traces of yourself in these buildings. I think you spend a bit of more time also sharing a lot about your buildings, and I'm wondering if you can pick any of those buildings and say, I see myself here, I see my history here, I see my activism here, if I'm right about that. So, but I'll leave it at that and hear your input from there.
Yeah, your story. Look, I mean, architecture is, for me, about activism in some way, because somehow we see architecture, at least this is my opinion, and I know there are many architects listening out there who don't agree with me. We tend to see architects are sterilized and kind of made this kind of pure discipline that is supposed to create beautiful objects and, you know, the most modern kind of ways of, you know, urban forms and all this. I think architecture is about really understanding your context, your people, and the journey that you yourself as an architect want to see reflected in the work that you do. So for me, whether I'm doing a Sandbag house for a very poor community in Freedom Park, or doing a high-end hotel, the approach will be the same. I will try to make sure that the things that I regard as my values are actually reflected in the building that I create. So it obviously needs people that you work with that also understand that. Sometimes it's not easy, but this is how I see architecture. I don't see it any other way. I do believe that we've got to engage with the materials. We've got to engage with what is it that we believe we are giving back to the environment, to people, to society. That's my view of architecture. So I cannot pick any one building and say it doesn't reflect the way I think. They all have to. They all have to live up to what I believe is the essence of what I regard as an architectural approach. Others have got different views, well done to them. And obviously, for me, I believe this is the difficult route that I've chosen, because it's also not the most profitable, because it's more difficult, it's more time consuming and everything. But this is what I enjoy in architecture. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's how I take the practice of architecture.
Certainly. I mean, the time that you spend with the community, usually if you're doing a project in the community, you are required to have community engagement. But from the process that you've shown us, it looks like this is you. you are an activist. You are you've got a populist approach to architecture, and I think you're doing it very well. And I think well done on that. There is a question from Oratile. Please go ahead, Oratile.
Just before that, it's not a populist approach. It's a collaborative approach, from my perspective.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. I get you. Yeah, but I think you.
I understand you. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think if you thinking of Nabil Hamdi, and you mentioned Charles Korean in his approach, yeah. So, but you're certainly right.
Yeah.
But thanks for the response. I think you've addressed it quite well. Over to Oratile. I think he's typed in a question. Maybe if you can just read it out for us.
Is he reading or should I read it? I see the question.
You can go ahead, yeah.
Okay, so it's asking that as someone who is both an academic and practitioner, do you think there's support for young marginalized students in the academy and in the practice to be able to continue in the profession? I don't know how I can answer that. I think the schools of architecture, practices of architecture have got a very big responsibility to encourage and mentor students. And obviously, it's a two-way process. If you're not putting in the work yourself, there's no lecturer that can give you the best. It just doesn't work like that. But on the other hand, the lecturer, in my opinion, in my experience, cannot expect that students are ready to be good architects. It becomes the onus of the lecturer, in my opinion, to identify those things that the student perhaps is passionate about and try and push those instead of kind of assuming that they understand or they've got the basic, understanding of design and architecture. So I think there's a big responsibility, and if you talk about marginalized students, I assume you're talking about students who don't have a background in architecture, who perhaps don't know anybody who's an architect, and perhaps, have heard about architecture, but actually don't quite understand, and they get into archi school because maybe they can draw well, or they've got good grades, whatever. So I don't know what marginalized means, but I do think that not every student who comes into architecture is ready for the journey that they are about to enter. And we've got to find ways to get the best out of those students if they are also willing to put in the work. So if I didn't have a Mr. Napier, who was my studio master, and continued with the same type of lecturers that I had in Natal, I probably would not have been an architect. So you need someone who is able to identify and who sees it as their obligation to do that. When I got to Germany, coming from a situation where I was regarded as not fit to be an architect, and getting to 300 lecture halls of German students, largely speaking very bad German. I just learned German in the year before. And I had to find my way in that environment. But you have got a system in Germany where the prof actually comes to introduce themselves to the students and say, okay, in my lecture series, this is what I'm teaching. In my institute, they call them institutes there, this is what we're teaching. And I remember very clearly one of the profs who came, they usually come in about 10, 20, 30 of them to kind of introduce their lectures. And one of them said, I teach design, and I will give you the tools that you need to understand the basics of what an architect needs. And I said, I'm going to that guy, because you choose the professors yourself. And then you get allocated if you do get in. And so this was another contradiction, because my lecturers in Durban, white lecturers, were saying they can't teach us design. And I get to Germany and they say, we teach design. So I just think that the teaching of architecture is going to be very, very important for us to understand the challenges that students coming in might have and how best to assist them.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions and compliments from Facebook. I'll pick few of them because of time. Please forgive us if because we won't be able to go through all of them. I'll read the first one there that says, first of all, please, may I take the opportunity to thank you for your contribution, strength, and foundation you've provided us as young South African architects. Then I will then go to I think the next one is quite important. It says, being the architect that you are today, what would you say is your fundamental rooting as an architect that influences spatial definition to your work, how your conceptual approach gets curved and carved, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and any influence you borrow from your bringing up, but be it your background as a child interacting with rural landscapes of the former Transkei, apartheid's exposure and its limits, would you say that the kid in you still plays a part in how you derive your architecture and approach to urban interventions? Probably linked to my question as well, but maybe you can answer it in a different way now.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are actually humbling questions because it does show that people, at least the complexity that I deal with when I approach projects, has come through. I think the issue of influences, I mean, as an African person who grew up in South Africa, I remember when I used to chat with Mphahlwa and even when we were conceptualizing the embassy, we always felt that influences for us don't come only from buildings, but they come from the lives we live. It could be music, you could be reading a book by Ngugi wa Thiong'o or Chinua Achebe describing a rural village in Kenya or Nigeria, and you actually realize that, oh, that actually relates to my village and how people live. And how do you then interpret that in an architectural spatial context? You therefore try to create buildings and environments that will give an opportunity for people to experience life between built form and open space, because this is what rural life is about. So when we were conceptualizing the Kosovo upgrading project, the issue of having that relationship between spaces and buildings and built form, let me say, becomes very important. Now, this is not necessarily something that you say is derived from rural areas. If you go to Berlin, Germany, to Europe, courtyards have become part of the urban built form. So you will have them in the African context, you will have them in the Europe. But there are space-making mechanisms to just make sure that you can manage your spaces in a better way than creating massive kind of spaces between buildings that are not well defined. It's about defining an environment and making sure that people can feel comfortable in that space. So I think that rural setting kind of sets you up for that kind of approach. It doesn't mean you can't do a Radisson Red. It doesn't mean you can't do, I mean, because you trained in architecture in different ways of doing buildings, but you've got to understand the context within which you're building. But for me, that kind of tactile approach to buildings is one which I can distinctly say speaks to my African upbringing. Polished, glazed, finishes everywhere, floors. It's difficult for me to say it's a comfortable environment. It becomes a sterile environment to a certain point. So all these things play a role. But I mean, every building has got its own role. So I think the kid in me tells me that the building must be fun. I mean, there are buildings I didn't show here. I mean, it just would not have worked. I mean, we've worked with projects in another context in Philippi Township, where we create bright colors, playful kind of columns and those kinds of things. I mean, I could give a whole lecture about how these approaches, come to be realized in our buildings. But, we had an hour and I tried my best to be within that hour so that we could discuss as well. So I left out a lot of the stuff. So I think that, yes, buildings have to be playful. Your kid in you has to come up when you design. You shouldn't be like this architect who's kind of a purist person who believes that, space has been defined by whomsoever in the history of architecture. But define your own parameters, but be able to explain it in the context of what proportions are you dealing with, what urban contextual setup you're wanting to create, and what experience you're expecting, which you can't also always define. It comes out. If you've done it well, people will own it. If it doesn't come out well, people will ignore that space and not use it.
Thank you so much for that. Last question, and then we just have to wrap up the session. I'll take this question. It says, what advice or guidance could you leave us after a great inspirational talk on how us as architects can navigate between commercial architectural aspirations while being able to address our socio-economic challenges we face? What could be an architectural attitude we should strive to adopt in our space making? So that will be our last one. And I think you might have touched on it there and there, but maybe if you wrap it up there, that will be fantastic. But I think it's a great question.
Yeah, first, I mean, before I even answer this, I have to acknowledge all the people that have, posed questions. I mean, it just helps. It's kind of part of a feedback. So all those thank yous and those acknowledgements, I really, really appreciate. That's why we do these things, because we want to get that feedback from people. It's not just a one-way process. So I think, the advice and guidance, I mean, that's a difficult part. I think the guidance I can give, and I always give students when they do interns in my office or young professionals, is that first and foremost, everyone has got a certain strength and passion about an aspect of architecture. Not everyone is everything. Any teacher who tells you that you can do everything as an architect is misleading you. You've got to learn all the tools, that's for sure. But you have to focus on what you think you are good at. If you love more an urban approach to architecture, meaning that urban design is more your strength and you like to look at your context and environment, try and push that. Even when you design, when you do your design, make sure that your urban contextual understanding comes through, even if you've got a crappy building, but dress it up nicely. If you are a real hotshot design person, be able to communicate your design in the simplest ways and try and be simple and not complicate and want to do many things. If you are good in technical aspects of architecture and you can do great detailing, then do that and be a specialist in that. Don't think because maybe you are not working much on the design side, you are a lesser architect. You are actually an incredible resource for the design to be able to be realized. If you happen to have love for just 3D rendering and you believe that as a presentation, post-production person, this is what you love to do, be good at it. Because when I do my design and not being a Revit guru myself, I want someone who's going to produce it as close as possible to what I want. And I want someone who's good at it, not just wishy-washy here and there. So these are very important things that Of course, you've got to learn the broader spectrum of what architecture school offers you. But you're going to learn at some point that there are things that I'm good in conceptual work and actually having an idea of what I want to see in the end. I can actually map it out, right? And that's what I'm good at. I'm good at, creating a design narrative for my design. I'm good at that. So, I mean, everyone has got a strength. So as you are learning, try and discover for yourself what you think is your best strength. And that's what you should focus on and be good at it. For me, excellence is not just a general term. It's about making sure that in the stuff that you do when you're given a task, you do it as best as you can. You can be corrected if it's wrong by your principal or designer or by your lecturer. But your lecturer, or I also try in my office to also give the young professionals the opportunity to bring their own contribution to what we're doing. I don't like to basically have to solve every little thing in a design process. So I like to employ people that also understand that they also have a role to play. I'm the lead designer, of course, and I'm going to teach you or convey to you our approach to design, and with the hope that you'll understand it. But you also have to learn that it is a two-way process. And when I do a sketch and say, this is what I like, I want you to think through, how can you make this happen? So for me, the guidance I can give you really is that just make sure that when you mature in architecture, you identify the things that you are good at and you try and excel on those. And obviously, I mean, the question of navigating between, the commercial and the social economic challenges is a big one, because the commercial pays your bills, the social economic one doesn't pay your bills. So you've got to kind of have a good balance. One of the things I regret, and because I do want to share about experiences as well and lessons, one of the things I do regret in my trajectory as an architect is that I focused a lot in the public sector work that I was doing, because I felt this is where I can make the biggest contribution. And I did not get involved enough in other aspects of architecture, be it commercial or whatever, even academic for that matter. I was focused on practice. I did not get involved a lot in academia, and I do regret that a bit. But I'm a practicing architect, and practice for me is what really gives me the kick. But I do think that one has to kind of straddle all these different strands in a good balance, so that you are not heavily reliant on one or the other. But you got to also have a point of focus. What is your main focus as an architect? Because if your focus is on the social, then you must accept that you're not going to have a very good basis to build. You'll be hustling for quite a while. So you got to manage that balance very well. International exposures to cultures, and of course, I mean, going to study in Germany, and it's a pity I really did not have enough time to bring in other aspects of travel, because it just was becoming too much. Travel has opened a lot of my horizons in terms of understanding architecture and how different people do different things. I mean, I've been to Lagos, I've been to Kampala, I've been to Mumbai, I've been to Delhi, I've been to New York, I've been to Tokyo, been to Venice, been living in Berlin, been to Paris, and I go to the rural Transkei every holiday I can. So I mean, that helps you just to understand that some of the things that you didn't know actually work, and people do things in very different ways. But you always just have to be true to yourself and not try to be doing what other people are doing. That's my view. But you know, it's always a choice that everyone has to make. But I think travel, engaging with people. I mean, I've just come back in July. I was invited to speak at the African Union of Architects Congress, representing, well, I was invited in my own capacity, but I also was representing SAIA. And it was in Morocco, in Rabat. And it was the first time for me to be in Northern Africa and to actually see how different it is to us. I saw very, very interesting approaches by architects who believe that the ancient civilizations of the Moroccan kind of culture are starting to engage with archaeological sites and are trying to take what they are finding and also kind of using it in a modern kind of way as a way of preserving their cultural heritage and architecture, practicing it today. And I met an architect there who's an architect, but an archaeologist also, who works with these rural communities who still know these techniques and are practicing them. I was fascinated by this because this is what I believe we are lacking. We look down on rondavels and mud architecture, thatch roofs and all this because we think it's looking backwards, but it's carrying with it a history that should be telling us how modern buildings could perform better in a more sustainable way. So for me, all those exposures do shape the way I see architecture and help me improve every time, because you can never stop learning, in my view. My favorite city, no, there are many. Berlin is, because I lived and studied there, is a great city, but I have to go with Barcelona. Had a great time in Barcelona, but I went to Rome and for the first time, I really felt now I can say I'm an architect. So all these different cities bring different things to you, you know. I went to New York and I never thought I would be blown away by a city. It did, you know. So I just think that if you have an opportunity, travel, open your mind, open your eyes, and open your heart to what you're going to find there. And that can help you, you know, find a new you, but also enhance maybe some of the things that you think make you tick. And yeah, so that's my input.
Thank you so much. I think we really appreciate that. Very good advice. Very good guidance and an excellent presentation. So thank you so much, Dr. Mphahlwa. We wish you well in the future. We hope to hear more from your story. As you say, in this limited time, you cannot really tell us everything, but we hope we can have another opportunity to hear from you. And I would also like to thank all that have joined us on the Zoom, on Facebook. Thank you for the great questions and the compliments. Thank you to PIA for hosting us, and thank you for all my colleagues from TUT. So we will end that session and wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Monin, I don't know if you want to say some few words.
No. Thank you for inviting me. As I said at the beginning, I mean, these are moments where we start reflecting about the work that we do, and don't prepare a presentation like this and just think you're just gonna rock it. It's about thinking, and it's about also having a kind of a thread of what you're trying to communicate. But I really appreciate being invited. Oratile has been kind of on my case. I wanted the presentation, but it was not ready. But here we are. We were able to present it. That's the important thing. Thanks, PIA. Monin,
Thank
for
you, Luyanda.
being part of this session, and hope for many, many more. And thanks to everyone who has watched as well, both on Facebook and on this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. And have a lovely evening further. And it was a wonderful talk. We really appreciate your time. Thank you, Luyanda. And thank you, Emmanuel, Victor, Oratile. Thanks for all your work with the In Plain Sight series.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have an added member, Kahle, but I think hope you're still there, but thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.